oath over here.
Okay, so let's just talk that second bar, the second line from the bottom where it starts at 4th grade. It's kind of a bluish in color. And you see the left axis over there has the RIT score. You don't really need to concern ourselves with that. That's a standardized measure of learning there. And what you see is from the beginning of school in 4th grade, in that blue line, as it goes up, our kids get better, they learn more until that typical last day of instruction, which is represented by that dotted line, kind of 3/4 of the way across the screen. And then we see that there's a little bit of a slide in the summer till we get to the beginning of school the next year. Well, our typical last day for us is somewhere towards the end of May. But our last day this year was middle of March. So we did not get the face-to-face learning that took place that we would have through a typical last day. So the question...
No, you're fine. Your thought is in the way.
No. So the question remains for us is, how much did our remote learning plan help not start that slide of instruction or that slide of learning, and how much were we able to mitigate that by actually the introduction of new standards in that remote environment? And that's what we don't know. For those who don't have access or weren't able to fully participate, they may have started that slide earlier. And those are some of the things that we're going to try to figure out. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is try to address the gaps. And so we'll be endeavoring to do that, especially in the areas of reading and math in grades K through 8. And we want to be able to move that assessment window up as early in the school year as possible so that we have the greatest amount of data on our students to be able to move forward. Bearing in mind, we don't have any end-of-year data. We don't have any end-of-year of our local assessments. We don't have any of the state-mandated assessments. We are, just so that the board is aware, we are going through the process of getting some assessment of where our kids are learning right now by having our teachers fill out assessment rubrics. Our rubrics determining how much our students how well they've done and how much they've done in mastering the standards through the end of the school year. This is not a typical number 2 pencil test. This is really relying upon our teachers as professionals and their professional judgment on how their kids have progressed throughout the school year and then all the way to the end of the school year through remote instruction. We'll have that information. We'll be gathering as teachers. We'll be going through filling out those rubrics, and then we'll be sharing that information next year with next year's teachers. But we still will have the need to kind of find out where our kids are. We do have mid-year assessments from the current school year where we are, and then we need to see where they are at the beginning. One of the things that we're looking at a possibility of is, will there be a way for us to perhaps bring some students in even earlier than the beginning of the school year and do some assessment. Right now, based on the commissioner's call that we had today, that is not allowed under the current guidance, but perhaps that will change in the future, and that's something that bears watching for us. Will we have the opportunity to bring some students in to get that done a little earlier? That can jumpstart our ability to get going on whatever changes we need to make. So, and it could be an additional cost. We'll talk about a lot about cost analysis. This is, after all, a budget workshop. The key thing on this is we need to be nimble and flexible during the school year in a number of areas, especially in regards to whatever gaps that we see. So let me talk about just some of the things that we are considering now. This is by no means everything that we're considering, and please don't see anything up here as gospel that we are actually going to do that. These are the state of conversations that we're having right now internally as a leadership team. Other ideas will come up and we'll see where we are. So the first thing we want to talk about is summer. We have an opportunity in the summer to address needs of students for a shoring of learning. We kind of look at those in 2 chunks. We have the June timeframe and we have the August timeframe. Right now, I don't know how much we'll be able to do with June, because June is really an unknown as to what we're going to be able to do. Whether there's a possibility we could keep devices and do some more remote instruction. There are some things that we might be able to do, and for especially some of our campuses, that are in the accountability system with our DCSI. We're looking at those options, but what I think we're more targeting at right now is the use of August and how we might do some things differently there. And those things could be up to and including starting a jumpstart model of instruction, maybe bringing some of our kids in a little earlier and having some time of instruction, or maybe doing a blended model for some of our kids who've been identified as needing additional resources prior to the start. Provided we maybe even have some type of a rolling start to the school year. Don't know exactly what that looks like. We haven't really fleshed that out. We may be providing additional supplemental resources for that time frame. We may be asking to purchase additional licenses for different software systems that can help monitor progress and instruction in this remote environment. So all these things are things that we have on the table right now and are discussing. We may even look at adjusting our school year, which we'll talk about in a second. So curriculum. Our pacing guides, what a lot of us would know as scope and sequence, we will be adjusting those. Our plan right now is not to start the school year by taking the first month to refine everything that we got in remote instruction the year before. That's not our plan right now. What our student academic services staff, directors and coordinators are working on right now are finding the standards that were assessed during remote instruction. And we focused on the critical learning standards at that time. We're looking at the other standards that were missed, and we're figuring out where they fall in next year's curriculum and stacking those standards at that same time period during the school year when it occurs. So not just taking it and putting it just at the beginning as a catch-up time, but layering that into the learning of when it would be happening according to our pacing guides. And we'll be updating our focus planning guides to reflect that as well. So that's a process that's going to be undergoing all summer. And then just one of the things that we need to be considered as a leadership team, as a team of 8, as a governance team is, we have some gaps. We'll be identifying what those are. Some of what we'll need to modify that is an increase of time, whether that's instructional minutes, instructional days, and whether that's for all students or whether that's for a focused group of students or both or a combination therein. We are considering narrowing our professional development opportunities to everything is critical for professional development. Don't get us wrong, we've done some really good job here at SCUC of supporting our teachers and getting them skills that they need to be able to be successful in the classroom. But what can we do? What can we focus on, and what can we open up perhaps this year and maybe hit next year, or hit in a different manner, or hit in a blended manner, and looking at that, and perhaps leveraging that time that may have been used for professional development to increasing our instructional minutes or instructional half days or those types of things. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, this could lead us to slight adjustments in our 2020-2021 school calendar. All those things are in the air and being studied, and those and other things will as well. And bear in mind, we don't start the school year next year for 3.5 months. So, but we are pre-thinking that. We have people hard at work addressing these particular options and more.
Good.
Yes, sir.
On the time, I assume that's not increasing the school day or the number of days, but just reallocating the time during the days.
Right now, we're not limiting ourselves to anything. In my mind, Mr. Inman, it's not making the school days longer. In my mind, it
could be an option, though. Is that somewhat what you're saying?
We could. There's any number of options that are available for us. But one of the things I think is incumbent upon us is to identify what we need and to the best of our ability, and try to figure out ways to leverage additional time in the day. So like I said, some of that could be professional development days that we're going to be 100% professional development. Maybe they're days of instruction. Maybe they're half-day professional development, half-day of instruction. Could we start perhaps a few days earlier and limit the professional development prior to the beginning of school? Perhaps, perhaps not. Hear me well. We haven't decided to start the school year early, and we have not decided to split professional development days into days of instruction.
All that's on the table.
All of those are resources. If you think about resources, we think a lot in board and executive leadership teams as a resource being finances and money, but a resource really is time. Mm-hmm. And so what time do we have built into the schedule? What options do we have available to think about in this truly remarkable time period that we're in?
And I appreciate you being up front, saying everything's on the table and telling us now, so.
We are not going to talk ourselves into a corner on this because we really don't know what's going to work best for us. So, unprecedented uncertainty, I think, is the watchword for this evening. That first bullet there says, could Texas schools opening in the fall be modified? We heard somebody address us about the opening of school in the public comment section. Some things have been talked about in the media over the last couple of days. Right now, the president, the governor, the commissioner have not talked about any changes to how instruction is delivered in the fall, but I think there is an understanding of all those in government and all those in public health that we don't know what the virus is what track the virus is going to take over the summer, and we do not know what is going to be available to us as options. We are planning, though, at this time, is having school in the manner in which we have had it. But we also, please know that we have got people working in the background of what it could look like in case we don't. It's just that we're not caught flat-footed if it's announced on August the 1st or something like that. We're trying to pre-think on some potential solutions for that. And know that we work with our folks in the region, especially in Region 20 and in Bexar County. I meet once to twice a week virtually with superintendents in Bexar County. Dr. Edwards is meeting with the Bexar County Chief Instructional Officers on at least a weekly basis as well. And so those folks are looking as well as to potential options for us. So that's an unknown for us. Again, unprecedented uncertainty. Switching more into kind of the usual reason we're here in a budget update is to talk about budget. We have a lot of unknowns with that. We don't know how COVID-19 will impact enrollment, and we'll talk about that. We're going to have to make some assumptions, and we're going to have to modify those assumptions. We'll talk about what they are right now here in a little bit, but we don't know. And as everybody in this room knows, how many kids you have and how often they come to school is the main driver of the school funding system as it currently exists in the state of Texas. Property taxes is a huge unknown for us. What will property tax rates be? Everybody got their property, who's a property owner here got their tax notices in the mail. Will there be more protests than there ever have been? Quite possibly. So we don't know what property values will end up being. And then when it gets to the end of the year, who will have lost their job will not have the ability to pay their property taxes. So what will our collection rate be? Again, unknown. And then that last one is a scary one for a superintendent and a CFO. I would say, what could the state call for mid-year budget reductions? We don't know. Again, flexibility is the watchword. Unprecedented uncertainty calls for unprecedented flexibility on the part of the senior administration and the board. You will see, I venture to say, you will see more budget amendments than you are accustomed to seeing in a fiscal year. As enrollment numbers, as cost numbers change, and as we have to move and react on the fly to what the current situation is. So that is what budgeting looks like in the time of COVID-19. So with that, let's move on to our current year. I always like to start with the status of our current year budget, kind of let everybody know where we are. So our 2019-2020 budget, the one we're living with right now, was adopted in August. And as we've discovered, it was it had a higher revenue number in there than we're actually seeing. The reason for that, it was driven by higher enrollment, or ADA, we'll talk about that in a second, higher enrollment numbers than we have been seeing in the past several years. As I think most folks are aware of, the last 3 years, we have added between 150 and 160 students a year. Our budget was adopted with a higher number than that, which projected more revenue that we didn't see. So our revenue based on ADA is about $2.1 million less than we had projected. And since we have not been in school and not having baseball and softball games and other types of events, our gate receipts are down about $100,000 as well. So right now, our revenue is lagging, and actual is lagging behind projections about $2.2 million. For current year budget, that's the worst information you're going to get tonight. So everything's better from here moving forward. Our 2019 property tax revenue exceeded projections just under $1 million, about $900,000. Again, in House Bill 3 moved us to current year property tax numbers, which are very hard as a big guess on the part of the administration and the board. In the old times, we used to know what our property tax revenue was going to be because it was prior year. It was we were able to budget easier. So we missed it by $900,000, but we missed it in the way we would want to. We got about $900,000 more of property tax revenue. Our 2019-2020 actual spending overall is less than forecast, about $3.3 million. Current, that's our projection through year end based on where we are right now. And that's for a number of reasons. Some have to do with us not having face-to-face instruction, not having to run the buildings, not having to drive as far, those types of things. Not filling positions, and we'll talk about that in a second. So where we are right now, trustees, is by fiscal year end, August 31st, we're expecting perhaps a surplus of $2 million. Bear in mind that number will change. That could go up based on further savings that we receive. Number could go down based on purchases we make related to the start of school and anything we may do related to COVID-19. So understand that that's a fluid number. We're giving you our best information we have here in early May. Okay. So you're probably asking yourself, what's the estimated impact so far on the closure of face-to-face instruction? We've had additions to the budget and we've had reductions to the budget. On the left-hand side, you'll see the additions. Premium pay, and you guys will remember that per board policy DEA local that authorizes the board and the administration to pay hourly employees who are called to work on site to pay them time and a half during their work week for that. We did that starting on March the 16th, and we will be moving to straight pay as was shared with you last week, be moving to that for all employees starting on Monday the 11th. As the governor is restricting, is lifting or modifying restrictions on the workplace and allowing a lot of places to have 25% occupancy. As we have implemented social distancing and cleaning procedures here in the district, that risk is less, so we are moving to straight pay starting on Monday. But that's about $110,000. Student feeding. That obviously you know that Texas Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Department of Ag oversees the National School Lunch Program. We expend money and we get that money reimbursed by the federal government through the Texas Department of Agriculture. We have stood up. We started at Schertz Elementary School. Gosh, Mr. Pruski, what was our first week? About 2,000 meals?
Maybe 2,000.
Maybe 2,000 meals. We've added Schertz, 2 Schertz. We've added Rose Garden. We've added 5 mobile sites at different places around the community. And now we're between 10,000 and 12,000 meals a week for students. Most of those we feel will be fully reimbursed by the Texas Department of Agriculture based on the guidance that we're getting. We would like the board to understand that we have a little bit of risk on the North Cliff site based on the percentage of low SES students in that particular area and the meals that we're providing. So we're providing meals to students that are a little bit above that poverty line. We thought it was the right thing to do, and we knew that there was a little bit of a risk. We will submit for reimbursement there, but we have about, in our estimation now, we have a risk about $400,000 that we may be paying for out of our school funds.
Just a quick question. Does that program end when school ends, or does it continue into the summer?
Yes, ma'am. So appreciate that question, Ms. Seaver. That program will end at the cessation of the school year, which is May the 29th. Now, there are summer feeding programs that have been in they've been enacted for many years, and many districts in this region do summer feeding programs. Mr. Pruski and Ms. Cornejo right now are exploring summer feeding. Now, summer feeding will look different than this type of feeding we're doing here. It will be on a much more limited basis. It will be primarily for about 30 days in the month of June. That's how summer feeding works through the Texas Department of Ag. So we're exploring perhaps doing summer feeding through one of our facilities, maybe kind of like we did a little bit earlier. So those are discussions that we're having every day right now. So we've had a discussion as an executive leadership team about how can we make that happen. Ms. Pruski and Ms. Cornejo are looking at what that might look like.
Do we, like with CIS, I know that their program only ends also. Do we work with them to see whether they plan to continue, or is that they just totally separate?
So CIS is Communities in Schools is a whole different program when they have their backpack program, and I apologize, but I do not have information about that right now, prepared to share with you. But that is some information we can get with you. We can talk with our CIS liaisons and see what the plan is over the summer.
Really, I sent you a text earlier today about just some questions on food service and just kind of run through those. So, food service has always been a separate budget, right? Which pretty much means that it's self-sustaining. In other words, the amount that we receive, the amount of federal and state aid, usually kind of balances out. We're not usually putting our own dollars into the food budget. I understand. So, what we'll be talking about when we move forward, we're going to talk about the general fund budget, the 199 budget, and that is the local district budget. The child nutrition budget is a separate budget. It is they pay as they go. Obviously, they get reimbursements from the federal government, and they get money that comes in when they sell lunches during the school day. So that's a whole separate budget. They have their own fund balance in there, and they are self-sustaining. Every once in a while, we could run into a situation like we're talking here. There is a possibility that we may need to move some money over. It may not be $400,000. They do have a fund balance in the child nutrition budget to be able to help with some of these things. And it very much helps with cash flow because we have to pay for these meals and expend them and give them out before we get the reimbursements. Okay. So is my understanding our feeding program, I call it the feeding program, I guess, because of this, we're not charging families, are we? For the families that do show up to collect meals, I don't think we're charging them, are we? That's yeah. Are we certifying that they are in fact our students or our families? So that is where the guidance from the Texas Department of Agriculture has evolved over this time period. At first, it was feed people, and then it was you have to certify that every person you're feeding is actually in your school. And if you may recall that SCUC and other districts actually had to have the kids in the car for a time period. Mm-hmm. And then we were able to certify kind of more globally, and so we could give that food out. We could kind of do it one time and give that food out. So we have modified, and I just want to pause right now and thank Maggie Cornejo, Francisco Perez, and his transportation folks who have done a yeoman's job in this, in rolling with the punches and modifying our practices and procedures as we get new guidance on that. So we're not charging families right now? We're not. Okay, so we're not going through the free and reduced and ability to pay. I mean, basically if they show up and so you're saying, so I know the children don't have to be in the cars, but we're still certifying that they are students of ours. You want to give more information on that?
Well, it's on the evolution. I'll use that word again. It's evolved every week, Mr. Inman. Okay. And right now, through Ms. Cornejo working with USDA and through Region and through TEA, the application for the child meals program right now through Schertz Elementary and through Rose Garden. And even as recent, I believe we've also have put an application in for reconsideration at Northcliffe. It may already be approved, so this could be something that we're waiting on this part. They have been out there with technology, with tablets, trying to certify at certain times. We have evolved from paper pen, from feeding everybody paper pen to tablets to now, if it's approved by USDA, we don't need to be out there checking every individual. It's an approved program for those sites through Schertz and Rose Garden. So that facilitates the mobile sites as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, 'cause I think I read Judson wasn't, you didn't have to be a student there or something like that. So this is the next kind of follow-up question is it discretionary on each district on how they want to run this, or is it more or less dictated by the federal government or the state government on what we do?
So, two parts to that. There are certain rules that make you eligible for reimbursement. So districts can do something outside of that. They could feed the elderly in their community. It's not subject to reimbursement. They could feed Monday through Sunday. Those Saturday and Sunday are not eligible for reimbursement. So yes, you'll see some districts based on their local communities making slightly different decisions, and we all kind of have to do it different. I mean, we started by serving every day, twice a day. Some districts started 3 times a week and moved to once a week. We've now moved to twice a week. So as I said, it evolves, and we have the local discretion to make those decisions. That's it. Thanks. Student feeding, I figured would be something we wanted to discuss. Anybody have any other questions on that?
I don't know, I seem to recall in Title I campuses, you can put everybody on free and reduced lunch. Is that correct? Or am I wrong?
It has to be above, I hate to say, to be a school-wide Title I campus, percent of free reduced lunch needs to be 40% or greater.
Yeah.
But for school feeding, it is much higher than that. I want to say it's 80% or 70%. It's a much higher threshold than we see in SCUC campuses.
Yeah, I know, because I know some school districts, everybody's on free reduced lunch, but they just.
That's because they have a very high proportion of their students. who
And
qualify for reduced lunch.
they don't get reimbursement for a portion of those students.
They
They just-
I think they get reimbursed for every meal they serve in that particular situation. But again, they have a much higher proportion than we do.
Population, yeah, okay. So you're talking about the summer, the June, would that be more restrictive because it would have to be just free and reduced lunch students?
So yes, it has to be out of a campus that has more than 50%, and correct me if I'm
Yes,
wrong,
no, you're going.
that has more than 50% of their students on free and reduced lunch. So we're 29% free and reduced lunch across the district. Most of our schools are not that high, so we have a couple of options that are.
Have we looked at Watts Elementary again as far as where they're at? Because they were right on the cusp of being a Title I campus. And
Again, Title I is 40%. For the free and reduced lunch for summer feeding, that threshold is 50%.
And
I mean, they were on the cusp. I don't know if they.
for the summer feed moving forward, it's really targeted, our site for that would be Schertz Elementary as it sits today, if we were to do the application.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So,
Okay.
Again, budget additions, we got $400,000 that we are resubmitting for. We'll see how that goes. COVID-19 assistance, that number changes every day. So we've joined the ESC 20 cooperative. I talked about that in transmittal. We're continuing to purchase personal protective equipment, PPE, hand sanitizer, wipes, those types of things. We just added about $11,000 to that so we can bring in stipends for teachers to do dyslexia assessment during the summer that will be required that we missed. We will have some special education assessment that needs to happen, but that's covered under a special education grant, so it's not a part of the 199 general fund budget. So those are some of the things that we continue to look at moving forward. Over on the other side, budget reductions, payroll is shalling up about $2.6 million. There's a number of reasons for that. One, we paid substitutes who had accepted jobs prior to March 6th, prior to closure on March 16th. We paid them if they're in long-term, if they're short-term. But now that we are in the 1st of May, we don't have a lot of subs that we're expending money on. We have vacancies. We have people who have left that we have not filled those positions. So we feel about $2.6 million right there that we will remain unexpended for the 1920 school year. Operations, our utility budget is lower than we had. Our actual utility costs are lower than what we expected. Part of that is attributed to the load that we have on the system. We're not driving the miles with our white fleet or our buses. So we have some money there, about $800,000. So as you can see, there's just some slight adjustments to the budget based on the closure of face-to-face instruction that we've had in the last 11 weeks of school.
Was there,
Yes, sir.
are we self-insured, like for vehicles? How are we insured?
We're outside entity. We went out for bids on that, so we are, for insurance on vehicles and property is outside insurance.
So, did we save any money there? I mean, we didn't drive any doggone buses.
So I know that personally, as a person who has a lot of kids and 6 vehicles on this deal, I'm very thankful for the folks at State Farm for returning a little bit to me in my personal life. That's an excellent question, Mr. Westbrook. I don't know the answer to have our rate premiums been reduced, and that's something we can get to you. We just don't know that right now.
Yeah, I know that too.
I think so, but.
So, all right, other questions on where we are current budget, because I want to move into our planning for next year's budget. Okay, all right, so I'm going to take a little swig of water here. 2021 budget parameters. Let's talk first about revenue. I realize that's small. It's probably even smaller on the little sheets of paper that you have to make notes on. But anyway, let's talk about enrollment projections. We talked about that earlier. That is one big unknown for us, and it is hard to plan for. We believe that there's a great possibility some kids won't come back. They will move away with family. Some will maybe like a remote instruction and go through that in a different manner, perhaps. Depending on what it looks like in August, there may be some who are fearful to come back. We just don't know. So how do we plan for that? How do we budget for that when enrollment is such a huge part of our budget? So what we are doing right now is we're using a no growth scenario where we take all of our exiting seniors and we take them out. We roll everybody up a grade level. We add in a projection for pre-K kids and for kindergarten kids. That is not a level number. That actually is a reduction from about 1,955 students is what we had last week. And that number, based on that methodology, drops us to 15,804 students, which is roughly 150-some kids that we would be reducing next year. And if you remember your math, that's about 1%. It's about a 1% overall budget reduction in kids. That's a 1% decline in enrollment. Could it be less? Yes. Could there be more kids who decide not to come back? Absolutely. Could we have a flatter enrollment? Could we actually see some more coming in? Perhaps. This is a number we're going to chase, and that will evolve all the way throughout the budget process. Again, we've got 3.5 months. This number will change. But here's where we are starting in May. We're looking at a 1% decline in enrollment. Now let's talk about how budgets are done. At the board level and the executive leadership team level, we talk a lot about enrollment, but the real number is ADA, or average daily attendance, and that is very simply the number of kids we have enrolled and how often they come to school. Budgets are funded on ADA, so that number looks different than enrollment. And let's look at the situation we talked about earlier this year. Our projected ADA at the time of adoption for our current year budget was 15,336 kids. As it turns out, we're projected to end up at about 15,070. All right, so that's why you see the delta. That's why you see the difference in the amount of revenue that is lost because of that projection. Our projected ADA right now for next year, 2021, is 14,920. Again, how many students you have and how often they come to school, not everybody comes every day. They come 96% of the time, 97% of the time. So that's what we're looking at. As you will see, that is also a 1% reduction in ADA. And so moving forward for next year, it's a reduction in revenue right now of about $1.2 million. Okay, that's what we're looking at right now. Could it be more as we move? Could that revenue projection be lowered? Sure. Could it be raised? Yeah, we just don't know. So for our budgeting purposes, trustees, right now, we are assuming a unanimous board vote when the time comes for the authorization to grant one additional golden penny authorized under House Bill 3. We talked a lot about that last year in the development of that budget. For our budget planning purposes, that one penny yields about $1.8 million to the general fund. Of that 1.8, about 1/3 or about $600,000 is local property taxes. But the balance of that $600,000 leverages or secures $1.2 million in additional state funding to the budget. So it's $1.8 million of additional funding that we have already in this budget numbers we're going to show you. Of that, only about 1/3 comes from local taxpayers, 2/3 is coming from the state. Okay? Property taxes. We alluded to that earlier. How much property tax revenue will we receive? We are right now using a 0% growth in the tax base. Now, some of you are furrowing your brows and wrinkling your noses because you opened your mail and perhaps yours went up. Perhaps yours went up a lot. But we don't know what it is ultimately going to be after protest. The assessors from both Guadalupe County and Bexar County are really squishy on this because they don't know what's going to happen. So we've got to get ourselves a pretty wide berth. We're starting right now at 0% property value growth. We're hopeful we can bump that up at least a little bit. If we're able to bump that up through the summer, at least a little bit, it's going to be a positive to the budget. Hopefully we don't have to go into any property value reduction. So I was talking to another superintendent this week, and their local property tax assessor's office says, yeah, we're projecting right now 3% property value increase, but be prepared for a 2% loss. Well, 5 percentage points doesn't help out a whole lot in the budget discussion that's there. So that's where we are right now. We will continue to monitor that. Property tax collection, go ahead, Mr. Evans.
I guess we got a bigger discussion someday about why we're projecting less students. I mean, I just still honestly find that hard to believe. But just, is it, for now, is that consistent with other districts, or do we have a unique problem here in Schertz-Cibolo?
No, absolutely. I believe all school districts, as they start in the San Antonio area, at least the ones that I'm visiting with, are looking at, I mean, there are some really fast growth districts that probably won't. But I think most people are looking at determining how many kids are going to come back. That's just a real unknown with that. So let me give you another bit of data as well. We are tracking the number of kids that are involved in remote learning. We're tracking them through their use of Google Classroom and the digital part of that, and also the ones that are coming in and turning in the packets that we hand out on a weekly basis. I am pleased to report that, I mean, we've got three groups. We've got those that are fully engaged in remote instruction. We have those that are engaged in remote instruction that are, not really doing as much of that, and there's those that haven't been involved in that. You take those last two groups, those that are only minimally involved in remote instruction and those that we have not come into contact with, and that's a little bit more than 1% of our enrollment. So if you think about it in that way, again, that's 1% enrollment that is not as affiliated with us right now as we hoped that they would be. That number is different in other districts. And every district, let's be careful now, every district is using a different methodology for determining what that number is. I just told you what our methodology is. That number will be different in Comal, it'll be different in Judson, it'll be different in Northeast. So again, that's kind of another marker of saying, hey, maybe a 1% enrollment reduction is, I think a safe number for us right now.
And it's not just here, it's across the nation. So
Oh,
it's everywhere. So
Well,
every school is
always
worried
have
about their
mobile.
numbers for next year.
Those
Like I
are
said, it's a pretty mobile population anyway.
So,
And this situation is as affected as Dr. Lee has pointed out, that we're going to have some kids who move off to live with grandpa,
Yeah.
uncle, aunt, whatever, or just have to share a home with somebody somewhere else because they've lost their jobs. It's not the same situation as we showed a while ago. Our projections were off a little bit from last year. So taking that as as a starting point, you can assume that, and I hate to use the word assume, because we all know what that means, but we can ascertain that's probably gonna hit us at the start of the school year. It may come back up again, but I would be cautious in moving to a situation other than zero right now. I'd be very.
So two things, we had to recalibrate our revenue projections down to what real actual is with our kids, and then we had to make an assumption, May 5th, again, we've got 3.5 months of this work to try to work on what that is. If we start seeing markers that tell us fewer kids are coming back or more kids are coming back, that allows us to work through the budgeting process. That's why it's a process that's months long. We're trying to give you our best conservative guess and realizing we may not be conservative enough. We just don't know. But we're trying to use some real reasoned approach for that first number we throw out.
And Dr. Ely, is some of that too how many of us parents register for next year as well, like going in the system and filling out the paperwork?
Sure, registration will be a number that we will be looking at, especially as we move through the summer and our registration numbers increase. I know a lot of people have not gone through the process of going online registering their students yet. It's not a really great metric for us right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what, discussion on the other day, but this is talking about the budget here. We're not talking about there's been a wave of children through the population and now we're kind of on the downslide, or a lot of people leaving Texas and moving to California. We're not dealing with that kind of situation, I don't think, right? We're still in a growth area. San Antonio to Austin corridor is still a growth area, I would assume. Gross number of school-aged children is still increasing. I'm gonna make those assumptions, but
Actually, no. It's
No, okay.
declining. As birth rates are declining, and as couples and young people are waiting later to have children, we have actually seen. The growth rate in enrollment is declining. So what I mean by that is, it used to be we in Texas. About 5.1 million school kids in the state of Texas. We used to add about 75 to 80,000 students a year. It was great because we could say, hey, it's like adding Austin ISD. Well, that number has gone down to the 40,000 and now it's in the 20 to 30,000. So we are still adding, yes, people are still coming to Texas for the opportunities that are afforded in the state of Texas, in the greater San Antonio area, but the growth rate is slowing. And that's kind of what we've seen. We're still growing in SCUC. But our rate of growth from earlier in this decade has definitely slowed to about 1%. All right, let's talk about property tax collection. Again, that is an unknown. We traditionally budget for a 99% tax collection rate. That 99%, we're going to receive 99% of our levy. Oftentimes, in fact, most times, it's greater than that. Usually hovers around 99.5%, and that's good because that little extra 0.5% helps us in the budget. As we look at differences in enrollment, so that does help us. Not knowing how many people are going to be able to pay their taxes, not knowing how many businesses perhaps will not be able to pay their taxes. Now, bear in mind, SCUCISD, 76% rooftops, we're not as tied to the business economy, but we do have small businesses here. We do have restaurants here. Well, we do have C-stores and other types of businesses here in town. How many are not going to be able to make taxes at the end of the year? We don't know. So we have lowered that assumption to 97%. That is a guess. I'll be honest with you. Will it be 95%? Will it be 98%? We don't know.
I'd be able to go back to 08, 9, and 10 during the Great Recession and see what our collection rate was back then, if that's as close as we have to anything like this. It may not be valid, but at least it gives some idea of what has transpired in the recent past.
And that is certainly something we can look. I know that other superintendents and CFOs are struggling, as well as county tax offices. County tax assessors are trying to figure out, our tax collectors. What kind of guidance can they give taxing entities on what to expect? Okay. And so if we collect 97% of a 0% growth instead of 99%, that's about a reduction of about $1 million in revenue. Okay. Other revenue, we are projected to decrease as well. SHARS is our reimbursement that we get for students on Medicaid for services that we provide in the school setting. We are, at this point, looking at perhaps a $400,000 reduction in reimbursements. We are going through the process of RFQ, for third-party services to help with this. We have one right now. We're going through that process. We maybe our rate of cost recovery may be higher moving in the future, but the services we're able to charge for may be lower because we've not been in school for a quarter of the year. So that's where we are right now. Impact aid, as you know, in a military community, we do get federal assistance for assisting our military dependents. We are looking at that right now, about $200,000 reduction. And interest rates have gone through the floor. They were steadily creeping back up over the last year and a half. And now, so we're projecting about a $700,000 loss in interest income moving forward. So here on oh yes, sir.
So for the last, for Sharks and impact aid, we're gonna lose it. I'm trying to figure out how to.
We're not losing all of it. This is a reduction in funds we're going to get.
Exactly, so why would we get less?
Well, for instance, on impact aid, Ms. Westbrook, it goes back 2 years. So in 1920, I should say, hold on. So in 1920, our number for this year on impact aid, there's a 20% threshold for funding from the Department of Defense. So we were at 19.3. So that is going to relate in a decrease in funds in the next budget.
So what you're saying is we had to hit a threshold of 20% of our kids.
20%.
Military affiliated by the definition for impact aid, which is not necessarily the definition that we use in SCUC.
Right.
And so because of that, because we didn't hit that 20% threshold, that's going to cost us about $200,000.
That's going to cost us about $200,000. On average, when we have hit that 20, you run the average of the years, it's about $200,000 for that year when we hit the 20. So when we don't hit it, we're just assuming then that that's going to be the decrease.
Again, we'll have more information as we work through the budget.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering if it's a reimbursement for the number or percentage of military students or just because of what we paid. Like if we shelled out $200,000, they're going to reimburse us $200,000, but you're saying it's based upon a percentage of our student population.
It's based upon our student population that respond to a survey about federally connected and working on federal connected land property. And that survey goes out, and normally we are above the 20% tile in that, and for that year we were below. So we know that that's going to be about a 2-year delay in funding, which would be in the 2021, or it's a 1 year, sorry, I said that wrong.
So Impact Aid is a grant program, and SHARS is a reimbursable. So that's the difference between the two.
Reimbursement
For school health services that we provide for Medicaid eligible students in the school setting.
So from that perspective, that's sort of where I was getting at. 400,000, we're not actually, we're not getting 400,000, but we didn't spend 400,000, so the reimbursement is like.
So we can get, I think, was it 1.2 million is what we were this year, was our SHARS reimbursable. We think that's going down. But we will still be getting some reimbursement money coming in, yes, sir.
We just can't count it as revenue that we might have used past,
So
that revenue is declining there.
So that's where the summary slide comes in right now. If you start with that 134.2, which was our adopted revenue budget for this current year for 1920, we reduce our ADA 1%, that's 1.2 million. We're saying zero property value growth, so we're not adding in anything right now. Our property tax collection rate is lower, so that's about $1 million. And then the reduction in interest income year over year, reduction in SHARS year over year, and impact aid year over year are those numbers. That brings us down to a revenue projection today of $130.7 million. Does that make sense? Questions on revenue? That number will change a lot over the next 3 months as we get more information. Okay. All right, let's talk about expenditures. That's the revenues, money coming in. Expenditures is the money we are expending to have school. So if we're going to reduce the budget from 134.2 to what do we say, 130.7. 0.7, we're going to have to reduce our budgets, our expenditures as well. So working with Mr. Prusky and our accountants, we are looking at 5 years of historical spending data. We're looking at certainly very much our current year budget, and we have identified a couple of areas that we can realize budgeting savings right now by adjusting our budget parameters, tightening up our parameters. The first one is payroll budget. That is payroll budget. That is not people. That is not positions. That is there are some things in the payroll budget that we can reduce about $1 million right now. So we can get some of that difference through payroll budgeting. I talked a little bit about utilities budget earlier. We put a pretty hefty utility increase in our current year budget. Now it's predicated on adding additional square footage to Clemens High School. I think we overestimated the amount of utilities that we added in there. We believe we can reduce that overall about $900,000. So right off the bat, through just different budgeting parameters, we can reduce our expenditure budget about $1.9 million.
An example of the payroll budget? It's not personnel, it's not whatever, so give us an example.
So payroll budget it includes a lot of things. So it includes everything we pay for salary and for benefits and for TRS payments and what we do to subsidize for healthcare and those types of things. We have some additional positions that are in billets that are in the budget that we can look at if we need to reduce eventually, but we also have our budgeting parameters for those open positions. We right now budget for those open positions at the midpoint. We don't often bring people in for vacant positions at the midpoint. We often bring them in lower, so we can adjust that. We also budget as if 100% of our employees are going to take advantage of healthcare, in case they do, but not all of them do. So there are some things that we can do to lower that, because if we look historically, we historically underspend that amount of money. So basically, we are tightening up to have our actuals look more like our actuals based on 5 years of historical data. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Mr. Brisky, anything you want to add to that?
The only thing I would add to that, Dr. Ely, is we also fully load every position to be here every day.
Thank you. That's
And that's not always the case, meaning day one start of school, we have everybody fully hired and everybody's here. Well, that's not always, you have various classifications of personnel that are not here all the time, every day. And that equates to subs, equates to vacancies, equates to non-payments. Anyway, so that's just another piece of that pie.
And employees leave in the middle of the year. Oftentimes there's a lag between we hire the next employee, and oftentimes we hire somebody who makes less than them. It's not always the case, but sometimes that happens. And so there's payroll is 82.6% of the current year budget. We're still pretty good with payroll. It is a large portion of our budget. We're pretty accurate with it. But there are some things that we can adjust in our budgeting parameters, and that's what we're looking at here.
Okay, so parameters, not, instead of full staffing, take a more realistic staffing approach based upon a 5-year, okay.
And is that why some of those years we had that extra money go in at the end of the year? We had be able to go into
Fund balance.
our fund balance, because we always, is that true? Is that where we got some of that money in the past?
That is true, and you budget for 100% of your 62 through 6400 budget, supplies, materials, contracted services, travel, all that, and people don't spend 100% of the budget. So we know that we're going to capture a little bit of the end. So that is why there is some capture of savings. In the manner in which we have traditionally budgeted in this district, yes, there is usually savings there at the end.
So I'll kind of go over this again when we get the final numbers, but traditionally this district's been what I thought was like very, very conservative with its budgeting. It sounds to me like you're trying to do it again this year. But also historically, there's been a little bit of wiggle room, let's call it, in there, in the payroll area, which is done for a reason, I assume, but just, I mean, so when we've had some surplus, it's because that part of the budget at least has had a little bit of wiggle room in there.
It is, in looking at the budget, I mean, there were some things for utilities that we, almost $1 million in utilities. There is stuff in payroll, there is some of the underspending of 62 through 6,400 budgets. But when payroll is 82.6% of your entire budget, a little bit of a change in that can yield some savings. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Unless you're gonna bring it up later, are you gonna bring up the fact about health insurance, we're self-funded if that's?
We'll talk about that.
Okay.
Yes, sir. All right, so what we got up there right now is talking just about budgeting and just about changing our budgeting parameters, and that saves us about $1 million. Let's talk about positions. Let's talk about attrition. We've already had a number of people that you have accepted resignations for in the district, like we do every year at this time. I've gotten the executive leadership team together and asked them to look at both their budget 62 through 64, and if you're not familiar with these numbers, by the end of the year, you will be, because we're going to talk a lot about 6,200, 63, and 64. We're looking at our budget reductions that we can have there. We're also looking at some 6,100 costs, which is personnel through attrition. So we believe conservatively right now, centrally, we can reduce our budget through attrition and some position reductions and some changes to some programs that we're offering, about $300,000. One of those I want to throw on the table right now, and that is the contracted services that we have used in the past for our student, parent, and community surveys. You recall that we were going to do a community survey this year. We never launched it because we went into COVID. But we've had student surveys and parent surveys in the past, and we've used a third-party contractor to work with us. That same firm has also been a primary leadership development, started first for the prior superintendent, executive leadership team, Team 1, and then this year we've done a lot of work with what we call our next level leaders. That's down from the coordinators and assistant director type positions, assistant principal type positions that we have in the organization. So we have done a lot of professional development, a lot of leadership development over the years with this particular group. That is a budget number of about $65,000. So what we have on the table is I have come in here over the first couple months that I've been here and have looked at the budget. That is something that, in my estimation, at this time, based on moving into budgeting during COVID and the uncertainties of next year, that I don't know is mission critical. It does yield important data for us. It does yield some priority 3 data and some priority 4 data as far as efficiency and certainly student, parent, and community satisfaction. That doesn't mean that we won't figure out a way to get community, parents, and students satisfaction data. We can do that another way. We can put this back in. This is where we are right now. As a part of that $300,000, it would be eliminating at this point that $65,000 expenditure there. Now, that's a conversation that we need to have, and we need to have over the next several months. If that's something that we need to add back, it's something we can add back. But in working with the ELT and looking at our most critical needs as a system right now, I don't know if it's most critical. And that is something that we could go about doing a different way, or something we could add back in. So, we can certainly have discussion about that more as we move on, but that is reflected here in this $300,000 number.
I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I think at one time, Baldridge Quality Texas, I think was the name of it. We may have spent about $1 million a year on that kind of training. Do you know if we're still doing that or still expending that much money?
I believe this, the group that we use right now is very much affiliated with the Baldridge framework, and they help us with, as we said, leadership development. And again, as I understand Baldridge, a lot of that is understanding your stakeholders and their feedback and making decisions based on that feedback. And that's a part of it as well. I would like to say here that the Intergage staff survey that we have given each year, we still plan, right now it is in the budget for next year, and it just opened yesterday. For employees here. And so that is priority 2 data that we get, that I know that is important to us as a leadership team. I believe it's important to the trustees as well. That is still in the budget for next year right now as we sit here today.
Part of your assessment is to determine what professional development training for the central office as well as our staff, and that this is just part of the outcome of that. It's something you've looked at.
If we were not in a situation where we needed to prioritize mission critical expenditures, we might have kept up with this, or we might have gone through a longer evaluation process. So, as everybody here recalls, I got here as brand new superintendent. 1st of February, had 5 weeks of regular instruction, went to spring break and never came back. So there is a much more of an evaluation myself, the executive leadership team, team 1, needs to do on our processes. And so, yeah, we might have kept it, we might not have, but we just didn't have that. This is based more on prioritizing mission critical things for instruction. All right, so that is central office of about a $300,000 position reduction and PD surveys, as we talked about. We talked earlier about adjusting our enrollment projections down about 150 kids. Well, if we're going to have fewer kids, then we would need fewer positions to be able to meet those needs. So based on the enrollment projections. So Mrs. Cannon, Chief Human Resources Officer, has worked with all of the K through 6 principals right now to look at enrollment projections, where kids, what grade levels will be increasing by campus, what grade levels will be decreasing. Looked at our staffing parameters. We have not changed our staffing parameters. This is just looking at lowering the number of students we expect and using the attrition that we have already seen, reallocating teaching staff and to a much lesser extent paraprofessional staff based on those enrollment trends. So looking at about 150 fewer kids, this is some of the attrition that we would do. We have had more resignations than this. So we are looking, and we are still have positions on our website that we are filling, both for current year and for next year. This is taking a very good look with our Human Resources Office and principals, virtually shoulder to shoulder working through this. If we weren't virtually, we would literally be shoulder to shoulder working through these. As I said, our staffing parameters have not changed on this. It's a function of a lower enrollment projection. To the extent our enrollment projections increase over the process this summer, these next 3 months of developing the budget, we could see an increase in the number of positions. And that's why we still have those ready through position management. Okay, so that's 8 professional positions, that's 8 teaching positions and 1 paraprofessional, and that's about $550,000, and I'll round that down here in the future here to 500. Okay. Other potential budget additions after the start of the budget. That's a great question, Dr. Ely. We don't know. We could have extra duty pay. We talked about some of the things we might be considering in the summer. We may have extra duty pay and different things that will happen next year. We don't know about. Different curriculum materials, different software licenses, different additional resources we might need to do. We may have additional cleaning and PPE needs next year that we cannot forecast right now. We may have additional technology needs. And I could put another bullet there for et cetera. We just don't know. Again, it's related to the spread of COVID-19 and us being nimble, kind of like I talked about at the beginning, being nimble and flexible and understanding that as the situation evolves over the course of the next school year. Right now with personnel costs, yes, sir.
When it comes to the increased COVID-related expenditures, was there any possibility that there could be some income? At one point in time, Calvert wanted to use one of our 3D machines or something?
Yes, sir.
And so he wanted to use it for a reason, but then can you because we have that capacity to do something, could we then use it to sell something, whatever he wanted to make, and then create some?
So Commissioner Calver, from Bear County Precinct 4, I believe, got in contact with us and was putting a bunch of volunteers and school district people together to try to manufacture face guards using some of the 3D printers that we have. So we worked with his volunteer group. That was not to make money, that was to support the effort locally to provide face shields. So that's what Commissioner Calvert endeavored to put a bunch of people together to do that. Could we show revenue? I guess there's a possibility of that. I don't see a way of that right now, but who knows? I will mention that right now that we do not have CARES Act in here because there's no great way for us to be able to adequately budget or project the amount of reimbursements we're going to get from the federal government. So to the extent we get some reimbursements and we get some grant funding from the federal government through CARES or any other acts that could come up in the future, that's not included in the budget. That would just be a benefit for us to be able to use, moving forward in the future. All right, so we have to make some assumptions as far as personnel costs at this time. Again, we're giving you where we are right now in early May in consultation with, I believe, all the school districts in Region 20 in Bear County. No one saw how we, especially with the big raises we gave last year, how we could move forward at this point with any compensation increases. So this budget that you're going to see here, this expenditure budget that I'm going to show you here in a second, does not contemplate any increases in compensation at this time. Could that change over the life of this budget? It could. We are being very conservative with the great amount of unknowns that we have really laid out and talked about earlier in the discussion. We don't have, that is the recommendation at this time in early May. The other, I think we had a question earlier today about healthcare costs. That is an unknown. We will be working over the next month to see what on our partially self-funded plan that we have for health insurance. What's that going to mean for premiums for our folks that take advantage of that? What does that mean for our district contribution towards health insurance? We don't have a good feeling for that right now. So that number could be a budget add, quite possibly. By the time we come back next month in June. I just don't really know. But right now, in early May, with having no number, we're keeping it at 0.
So you don't even have a reference point when it comes to like visits to the hospital, to the
We're
doctor?
working through gathering that data right now. Yeah, we're gathering that, analyzing, we're working with our TPA, who helps us with that, and trying to make projections on trends moving forward. So we hope to have a good first stab at that number for you next month.
And then in about 9 months, you're expecting some babies, so.
Well,
I've been sitting here for 5 years.
I mean, they're at home all day, that's all I'm saying.
so,
We move forward.
it's Robert Westbrook.
And even if that were to happen, we wouldn't see any benefit for 5 years anyway.
Enrollment benefit. that's right.
Enrollment,
Yeah. That 5-year lag.
Healthcare costs.
Yes, sir. No, very definitely, there is a great deal of unknown on healthcare, projecting healthcare costs. We know even before the pandemic, it was very difficult for us, and so, and for everybody. So that's where we are. We'll have you a better number. I have no idea what it'll be next month.
Since you're gathering data, is there any indication of how many teachers have even sought testing for COVID?
I don't have that number available. I'm sure we can find that. I'm not sure we can find that. We may not be able to find that based on HIPAA.
Yes, but I was just wondering, it's all reimbursed.
To your point, we did modify, thanks to Mrs. Cannon's leadership, we did modify some of our benefits a couple months back, or a month or so back, to fully paying for the cost of COVID testing for those who qualify. And so we don't know how many have taken us advantage of that. We may be able to get that number, we may not.
The federal government said it was a no cost anyway, right? So even if we pay for it, would that be reimbursable from the federal government? Because
Mrs. Cannon, who is joining us on Zoom, were you able to hear the question in regarding to reimbursement for COVID testing? I just talked about us making that change to our plan. Is that fully reimbursable from the federal government? Do you have information on that for us?
I have not heard anything about being
Can you hear her?
reimbursed this time.
Wayne, when we do that insurance feedback, usually at the end of the year, don't we see how much percentage we paid out in claims, so we know? I know we have that insurance policy if we went over 100%, but we were hoping, because we kind of keep that money at that stop loss, yes.
That goes back to what Dr. Ely was mentioning. We're gathering that data and we're following that. And then also looking at that through monthly reports from Gallagher.
Okay, yeah.
So we should have more information as we tighten up this year.
Okay.
Let's not forget that there's been a freeze on elective procedures, and anything that might have been reimbursed for elective didn't get expended because they aren't doing it.
And maybe they will.
Yeah, there may be
Part of next plan
There
year.
may be a bubble in there.
You're right.
Yes, sir. That's a good point. I hadn't considered. Other questions on personnel costs before we move on? So a summary, like I did for the revenue, here's the appropriations summary right now. Again, we start off at $134.2 million. The reduction of the payroll budgeting, tighter payroll budgeting of $1 million less in appropriations. Tighter utility budgeting is a reduction of about $900,000 overall to the budget. The central office adjustments that we talked about is $300,000 reduction to expenditures. Campus staffing, based on lower enrollment projections, is about $500,000. Compensation is no add right now, and healthcare benefits is no add. So we have a draft appropriations projection here in early May of 131.5. So putting them together, we have a revenue budget of 130.7. We have a draft appropriations budget of 131.5, which has us at a deficit right now of just under $1 million. And on a $130 million budget, that is under $1 million, is really pretty tight right now. So, questions so far on budget parameters for next year?
Just for clarification, because on the golden penny,
Yes, sir.
I think back at the slide said it's included in the current budget planning. Was that, so if we voted for that, I think you said it was $1.8 million that we would get?
If you vote for that, you're getting this. If it does not pass unanimously, we've got to lower our revenue $1.8 million.
Yeah, so the $1.8 million is included in the 130.
Yes, sir. So it will be the administration's recommendation to go forward with that when that time comes.
So otherwise, man, I think most people this would look like a fairly scary budget, I would call it, or very, very, very conservative, which is good. I think that's what we've normally done, but we're basing this on a reduction in students, no increase in taxable value, and a fairly low tax collection rate. Right? Those are
Yes, sir.
pretty conservative numbers.
Yes, sir.
So
We, as superintendent and CFO, throwing a first budget out there, you endeavor for it to get better as you go through the budgeting process. With the uncertainty related to COVID-19, quite frankly, trustees, we have to be realistic too, understanding that a 97% collection rate could be 95%. And losing 1% of students could be 2% of students. We just have to be pretty, just knowing that it's just really uncertain at this time. But our hope is that both, as we go through this, my hope, I guess, as superintendent is, that revenue number is going to go up slightly. And quite frankly, the appropriations number is going to go up slightly. Because if we have more students, we're going to need more staff. If we have more needs, we're going to have more resources. And we'll continue that discussion as we go on through the next couple months.
So arguably, the legislature doesn't meet until January. So
The next regular session does not start until January of 21. Yes, sir.
So they can't really move the ball on us necessarily at this point.
Unless the governor calls special, 30-day special session.
Well, the legislative budget board could, depending on revenue coming into the state, they
See,
could move
that's
those
scary.
the amount of money coming down to the school districts. That's why I say talk about mid-year reduction, legislative budget board could do that to us.
I think, Mr. Finley, technically they could, but let's recall that, that public education, unlike some of the other things in the state budget, like the highway department and the prisons and other things, public education is a constitutional guarantee in the Texas Constitution. They have to provide for a general diffusion of knowledge. And the manner in which they fund Texas education is a matter of law. They changed the law back last legislative session with House Bill 3. So what's the word? Basic allotment. The basic allotment is in law. The early educational allotment is in law. So to a certain extent, they have to fund based on law, unless the law changes. Which brings us to where we will be 1 year from now, is in the middle of that legislative session that Mr. Inman talked about, and contemplating a very different state revenue situation, and that law changing, and what will happen to the basic allotment, what will happen to these other allotments, and the budget projection for 21-22 may be less rosy than what we're looking at right now. So with that in mind, there are other things that we could do to reduce the budget that are still available that we are not tapping into right now, because we have to keep some flexibility for 21. And we have to prioritize the classroom. We really have not touched the classroom or the campus level. We have only adjusted our numbers based on our enrollment projections. We have not updated our staffing projections to change those ratios.
So one other thing too, just moving forward, is looking like you're projecting that we're going to add an additional $2 million to our fund balance. So that's, I hate to look at it this way, but we're starting off with $2 million increase there to possibly use over the course of the next year as well.
I would say that is a resource that the administration and the board need to think about as we work through that budget. As we put the money in the bank this year, perhaps it's something we could use next year, correct? Now, we have kind of done that through EPP.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm not prepared to have an EPP discussion right now. We can certainly talk about that later. But if we do have that resource, then that is something that we can certainly have a discussion on moving forward, especially if we have very different COVID-19 related expenses.
And that 2 million, some of that would not be going in there if we were not having, if it would have been completely a regular school year.
Some of it would, and
Some of it would
wouldn't.
not have.
Correct.
So that number could have looked very different
Could have.
in June than what it may look now, just because savings on buildings and things like that.
Yes, ma'am. That's
It's gonna
fair.
be it's gonna be a one-off because of the situation.
Exactly. Just like it's gonna be one-off.
Well, there almost certainly is going to be, you just mentioned something about needs and resources. And so considering the possibility of another second increase, a second wave, the football season, what that would look like, testing for athletics, we would incur some costs there, right? Because if there was athletes playing football.
Any changes that we would make to our normal operations has budget implications for both appropriations and resources. Yeah, we would be paying officials, but we wouldn't have gate receipts if we didn't play football. So, and that's kind of on everything. We don't pay as much in fuel right now because we're not operating our buses, but we're not getting our transportation allotment per mile because we're not driving.
That's true.
So, they're not one for one.
Is offset, yeah.
Yeah.
They're not one for one. They don't offset totally, but there's budget implications as you can see on both sides.
Last question, is this the first time you've publicly stated or sent word out that we may not be doing compensation increases?
This is our first conversation about this, yes.
So it's the first time staff may have heard of that, if that's what we're looking at doing moving forward.
That is where we are at this point right now. And I would venture to say that we will, that most, if not all districts will be moving forward in the same manner. I mean, I can't speak for the other school districts right now or what their boards will say. But everybody, to start off initial budgets, are being very conservative for great reason with all of the unknowns. Unprecedented uncertainty. That's kind of how we started.
We talk about that every year, just the risk of people leaving us to go somewhere else because of pay increases somewhere else or whatnot. So there's a reduced risk of that because most other districts are more likely than not going to do a hold on compensation as well.
If you allow me to reflect as someone new to the district, we do very well in compensation, even with the changes that were made all over the employment landscape in the greater San Antonio area through House Bill 3. We are still the upper half in beginning teachers, and we are in the top 2 in every other grade band of teachers. And when you look at our other employees as well, we are very competitive with our peers in the greater San Antonio area. And that's something we should be proud of.
Was there any cost savings in the whole procurement process?
Yes, I mean, there are certain things, there are consumables and things that we're not buying for instruction, but our copying bills are going up for that. We're spending more money for PPE and other things. So do you have a number that purchasing is,
No.
purchasing supports all these other budgets, so it'd be hard to just limit it to purchasing.
I don't have a number for that.
We kind of try to give you the big rocks for savings, and utilities is one, fuel is one. We probably have an increase in paper and toner, but we've got decreases in others.
Our fund balance requirements are gonna go down if our budget drops, correct?
Yes, sir. Our 199 fund balance is healthy. Right now, based on projections, it's about 4.2 months, which greatly exceeds both Schools First recommendations and TEA requirements.
I was thinking, if we have $800,000 deficit, and we have to approve a budget by the end of August, and we're sitting there with our very good fund balance, but the budget drops below that level we've been having fund balance, or having fund balance up to 75 days or 60 days, whatever it may be. Then all of a sudden that requirement drops because we're dropping from 134 down to 130. So that means that money that's in there, we can actually use to fill that gap and actually not change our fund balance requirements in the state level. So essentially, while we have a deficit budget, the state requirements would drop also, as far as what we have to have in fund balance to cover that 60 days.
Yes, sir. I anticipate that we'll have some talks as we progress about the use of fund balance and about budgeting assumptions and how do you account for money in the budget that may go unspent or has historically gone unspent. Do you count on that at the end, like we're doing this year, or do you count on that at the beginning and do more of a deficit type budget scenario? So I think that'll be a good conversation for us to engage in as we go through the next several months.
It also gives us a fallback position in case these numbers are this bad or worse. It does give us additional money so we can pull from our fund balance, because fund balance is only used for one-offs, but this is definitely a one-off. At least we hope it is.
It can be used for a number of things, but traditionally we've used it for one-offs because we've used it for EPP projects. Yes, sir.
So that gives us some flexibility. That would be $2 or $3, $4 million probably right there that we would have available. So, I mean, the deficit budget looks bad because we never had deficit budgets, but there are ways we can fill that hole that would not drastically affect our current financial situation.
We have adopted a balanced budget each year that is really a surplus budget when it comes to the end of the school year. So we've got to have a discussion as a governance team about what our assumptions are on how we construct budgets. And honestly, this year may not be the year for it. But that healthy discussion may be this time next year as we are staring some potential significant shortfalls in the face with whatever the landscape in the next biennium looks like for the state.
This is just a reference to the budget of 2021. Obviously, things we do today for budget 2021 will affect the 21-22 budget of all of the legislature.
Certainly.
So if we get through the current 2021 budget, then we can have those discussions as the year rolls on. By that time, we should have better information. I hope so. not guarantee we will, but if we're gonna go through the next, budget year, we have a number of options that could get us through there, even in a bad situation, because you're talking about 800,000. That could be zero, that could be $1.6 million, depending on a whole bunch of factors. So, like, even though it looks bad, we have one of the biggest advantages, we have options. We have a lot of options we can go by to do certain things. So while it doesn't look good, at least we're in that situation where we do have options. And that's a better position to be in than I can think of anything else.
So, I'll go to you, Mr. Emmett. But I do just want to reiterate that our fund balance is healthy, and it is significantly above the requirements that a district needs to have. So through the process that we've gone, we have a resource that is available to us, and how we choose to leverage that resource in the future, both this year and in the year's future, is on more discussion. So,
Yeah, I wouldn't want to use those absolutely have to, but at least it's there and it is healthy.
Mr. Emmett?
Yeah, I would say from a PR standpoint, you made the comments that we still just need to let our staff know they're highly valued, and our community know that our staff's regardless of what we're doing, one of the highest paid staffs in the area, I guess. And we still do have a healthy fund balance, regardless. I think you didn't bring up tonight, so I don't want to open the can if you didn't do it, which is great. You didn't say anything about cutting any programs or eliminating this, that, and the other, or slicing the band or athletics. I mean, you didn't, nothing said about that, and we still have an okay conservative budget. So you're not looking to do anything on those lines.
Let me say this, where we sit right now with what we know, bearing in mind, there are some great unknowns out there. This is not a dire budget.
No.
It's not. I mean, we are not impacting the classroom. We are not reducing programs. We are not increasing student-teacher ratios. None of those things. We're not increasing square footage that the custodians claim. Okay, so with that in mind, but it is a conservative budget, and it is a tight budget right now. I'm hopeful that we're going to have some markers that will help us as we move through budget preparation. That some of our enrollment numbers, some of our property tax numbers will be better, and I hope that we will be opening school in a manner that as close to as possible resembles school as we know it. So, but as a good steward, as we all are good stewards of the public's money, I think this is a great start for us right here. A conservative first stab at it. We will have, as I said, more information when we come back together next month.
So I would say, so the bullet points were fairly positive, but then all that's contingent on us voting for that golden penny tax increase as well, right? So
if the board does not unanimously vote for that additional fifth golden penny, then we will have to adjust this revenue down $1.8 million roughly.
So I would just say from a communication standpoint with the community, that's important. That we can still maintain all these positive bullet points if we increase that tax rate by a penny. Without that, then we may have a dire budget. I mean, if we don't access those extra 1.8.
It will certainly become tighter, more difficult. Absolutely, yes, sir. Again, let me pause. It is May the 5th. Happy Cinco de Mayo. All right, we are still in the middle of the cessation of face-to-face instruction. We're still figuring out how the governor is going to reopen the state gradually, what school is going to look like, how many kids we're going to have, what property values are going to be. As one superintendent in the area said on one of our conference calls, and he is as old as me or older, said this will be the budget with the most unknowns that we have ever brought before a board in his lifetime. So I realize that we want to talk about specifics, and it's just real hard for us right now. So we're talking more in concepts than we are in specifics, and that's just because that's where we are at this point of the budget process.
So with this budget that we're building, the state, the money that they gave, HB3, that they said, hey, here's what you're going to have.
Yes.
that was predicated on a certain amount coming in from sales tax, from oil, et cetera. When that money's not coming in, at what point, we're expecting this next spring for them to come back, because, I mean, realistically, that money's not there anymore.
Correct.
And so we just can't, it's not gonna fall from the sky.
It's not going to be fun.
Right, that's not, so if we're really lean now, I worry about what we're going to have to look like next year. Because I do believe the state eventually is gonna go, we don't have the money.
We are keeping some options open from a macro level, Mississippi. We're leaving some options open for the district moving forward into 21. We haven't screwed down everywhere in the budget right now because we know, or we very much suspect that there's going to be a significant impact to the state's revenue vis-a-vis sales and use tax, oil and gas severance tax that they rely on. We know where oil prices are. So there's a lot of markers that we know, and even the recollection that the state gets of property taxes through property wealthy districts. There's all sorts of markers that are going to impact that. Comptroller Glenn Hager is the one who's responsible for making projections leading into the biennium as to how much revenue is going to be available. He's already talking about. I mean, he missed it. Obviously, he didn't know about the pandemic. So he's adjusting those as we go through. He's adjusting these through the second year of the biennium, which is what our fiscal year starting in September 1st is going to be. One of the things that the politicians talk about is the concept of a V-shaped recovery. We go down, down, down in all of our economic indicators. When are we going to start coming back up in the recovery? Nobody knows. To the extent that we go down and we come back up quickly, perhaps the impact on next biennium could be lessened. To the extent the economy stays down on a prolonged period of time, the state government will not have sales and use taxes. They will have less of that. They will have less of oil and gas severance taxes, and that will impact the next budget, which is not unlike what happened to the public school system in 2011. We remember the Great Recession started in September of 2008. It was felt most acutely by schools in 2011. So that's kind of what we're looking at, because we are funded by the state, and state is funded, their revenue comes from taxes.
Well, you even had one of the slides back, you talk about could the state call for mid-year budget reductions?
Could they? Perhaps.
But
I don't think they can based on where we are, but I honestly don't know. So that's just something for us to be aware of. All right, are we ready to move on? We've got more stuff to talk about. You ready? Okay. We're going to give a high-level view of where we are on our debt service, or INS budget moving forward for next year. So if everybody will memorize this slide that we attest at the end of the workshop session. I've got jokes. So I'm just going to take you through this just so you can see how the slide works. You can see the years in the left-hand column. The debt payment is the debt payment that we had, principal and interest on all of our bonds that we had in 15-16, in 2016-17, so on and so forth, and estimated through the 21-22 school year. You can see how that goes up as we incur more debt through the selling of bonds for the addition of facilities and renovations to facilities. That next column, that third column, is the tax revenue that we yielded based on our INS, or interest in sinking tax rate. If you go all the way over to the right-hand column, the farthest one, you can see the tax rate. 45 cents, 43 cents, 45, 45, 45. As everybody in this room is aware of, we are statutorily limited to a 50 cents per $100 of assessed valuation for a tax rate to service our debt for interest in sinking. So we have, for the last 3 years, have been at 45 cents. But that shows you what that yields in that third column. That fourth column that says other sources, we got EDA, or existing debt allotment. We got some state help for our existing debt. We no longer qualify for that based on updated funding schemes here in the state. We also did some refunding of debt and restructuring that to capitalize on savings, the lowering of interest rates that lowered our payment and allowed us to have some other sources of income. So you see that we had a little bit from $200,000 all the way up to 3.8 over the last 4 years. Under this current year, at this point, we estimate getting zero extra help. So that difference there is the debt payment, how much of that we were able to pay for using our tax revenue and our other sources. And that difference of looking at the 15-16 school year of $765,000, that money came out of the fund balance, which is that second last column, the fund balance at fiscal year end. So I'll just kind of walk us down through that one right there. Our fund balance was $5.6 million in 15-16. We were able to add back about $2.6 million into the fund balance. Even with a 43-cent tax rate that year, we had a great increase in taxable values. We also had some other sources that went into it. So our fund balance went up to $8.2 million. It was a high water mark recently for our fund balance. And I will remind the board, this is our interest in sinking our INS fund balance. This has nothing to do with our M&O fund balance that we talked about earlier. Okay. So 8.2 million is where we were, then it went down to 6.7 million, then it went down to 5.6 million. Our estimation by the fiscal year end to fiscal 20, this year that we're in right now, it'll be just under $3 million that we have in our interest in sinking fund balance. Okay, and as you can see, we've got debt payments there, and we've got our tax revenue, and we've got our other sources, and that is how we are now at a fund balance of about $2.97 million. Okay, everybody good with this? Kind of, that's the last 5 or 6 years or so of our debt service, tax rate, and budget history. Okay, so here's some of the things that we have talked about that the board members are familiar with. Now we just talked about that. We took $2.6 million of money from fund balance. So FB is not football, that's not Facebook, that's fund balance that we took this current year to make our debt service payment. What we know next year is that, I'm going to go back, our debt service payment is increasing about $1.34 million. So if you look at our debt payment, that second column, it was $29.079 million this year. Next year, it is projected to be $30.4 million. That's a $1.34 million increase in the debt service payment. So we have to come through, and we can't be relying on our fund balance to that extent anymore. Plus, we have an additional increase in our fund balance, our debt service payment of about 1.34. I'll go back. It does sort of level off. It goes up about another $500,000, and it basically levels off well, you can't see this here, but after 21, 22, it doesn't continue to go up. It stays in that 31 million range, and as we go through, it doesn't continue to go up as we move forward, and hopefully our property values will increase, which means our levy will yield more revenue as we move into the future. So, talked about that right there. So our budget assumptions recall that we have right now an increase of 0 in property and total assessed value. So that's 0 added to what we could add, we could consider there. And a collection rate decrease of 99 to 97. And on the debt service side, that's about $500,000. Okay, so that means we're going to have to address our debt service payment for next year. We don't have numbers to throw out at you right now. We will have some better numbers, first numbers for you to look at next month. But I'm trying to put the picture in the frame. There's a couple things that we can do to increase revenue to make that debt service payment. One is and that is to use the fund balance. We know we have about $3 million that's available for us in the fund balance there. And it's also another option for us is to address our levy. Now, on the decreasing payment side, we do have an option to address that number by doing an advanced refunding. Right now, our callable debt is not callable until, correct me if I'm wrong, but November of '21 is when some of our debt is callable, allow us to go through a negotiated sale and refund that debt and get better interest rate terms and lower our debt service payment. We are in an interesting economic time in regard to interest rates and where they are in this current situation where we are. We do have the possibility of doing an advanced refunding and paying taxes on that and paying fees, but still taking advantage of very favorable interest rates and not extending the amortization or extending the length of our debt service payments. I'll just let you know that as something that administration is working with our financial advisor on looking at options for that. We don't have anything for you. In fact, we were on a Zoom call yesterday at 4 o'clock with our financial advisors. I want the board and the community to know we're looking at not only the revenue side, but we're looking at the expense side and what our options are available for this year and for our near-term debt obligations coming up here in the future. Okay? Don't have any good numbers for you right now, so I don't want to put any out there. But those are kind of the big rocks, as Stephen Covey talks about. We're not talking about the little rocks. We're talking about the big rocks there. We want to get those situated before we add the little rocks in and sand.
Wayne, we knew this was going to be a rough year because we knew we could refinance after later. Yes.
November,
Right.
that 21 year, yes.
We knew this was going to be a tight one. We've kind of been warned about that. Correct me if I'm wrong, for a few years.
And you have to balance out the early call fees and penalties versus the interest rate reduction and see if it's even doable.
And I will say we are by far not the only district that is looking at that. A number of districts have already done that. Just looking at, you got to look at the interest rate environment. And so you weigh that versus increasing the levy. So, and the capacity you have there.
Since we're close to the end of what we can refinance, that penalty may not be horrible. It won't be pretty, but it may not be horrible depending on the interest rate.
And I have no idea what it is. That's why I work with our FAs for different scenarios on that. They've got a number of different ones. Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, so wasn't too long ago, we were looking at increasing our bonding capacity somehow because of the need for third high school or other schools. And so far, student growth just isn't on par with what we thought it was going to be. Does that somehow give us more flexibility too?
So, Mr. Pruski, we shared with the board at the March or the February meeting that we did an updated 10-year facility master plan. February.
Budget workshop, right?
At the budget workshop, yes, sir. So that was 3 months ago. We've all slept. And one of the things that we did on that is we pushed out the dates for potential additional bond elections because the need for additional facilities based on updated enrollment projections with a slowing growth rate has put that need farther out. So yes, sir, we already have looked at our need for facilities based on slowing enrollment growth.
And pushing that out helps us pay down that
Yeah.
debt as well. That's what
It does pay it off, and to the extent that property values increase, once we get through this interesting time that we find ourselves in, our capacity to yield revenue based on our levy increases as well.
This is kind of the curiosity question. So all property owners got their appraisal numbers not too long ago.
Yes.
For each individual property owner, and trust me, it's higher than 0%. I mean, I think for everybody, right? So does the district get some kind of preliminary taxable value, possible assessment of what the overall numbers are going to look like?
Sure, we have it.
Yes, we usually get one towards the end of April, a very early one. This is prior to any type of protest. And then we usually get one, I think it's statutorily required to get one on finals on July the 25th. However, I don't know they're going to be able to make that this year. What happens as the uncertainty increases, the confidence interval that we get back from the assessor widens. I use an example from another district. It's not our district, but earlier, that they said, okay, we're projecting a 3% growth, but don't be surprised if it's a 2% reduction. Okay, so 3% growth with a 5% plus or minus confidence interval is what we're having to deal with right now. So yes, we have received some numbers from Guadalupe County. I don't even know if we've received anything from Bexar County, because it's...
To answer that, we received 2. One was needed to be adjusted. They recalled it back and then sent us a second version. So we're waiting to see if that, so
It's a lot of uncertainty.
to use the word earlier, it was very squishy for both.
Okay, so I'm not gonna tie you down on this, but if every individual I know got a 9 to 10% increase, give or take, I don't see how our overall district would have a 0 or negative increase.
That is not anywhere near any type of number that we have received from Guadalupe County.
I know people that they stayed the same or went down in our area, yeah.
Okay.
And that takes into account everybody paying, Gary,
Yeah.
so.
Well, he's talking about property values. And
Oh,
I
that's
get that.
true, yes.
And remember, we've got Marion, we've got Seguin, we've got a big county. So,
Okay.
well, actually, we don't. That doesn't matter for us. We've just got us. We've just got Schertz-Cibolo.
You got a wide range
You
in
do get a
the
bigger
cities.
picture of the whole district.
Yes, sir.
You do have access to that.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Well, if I remember right, the protest deadline is like May 15th.
May 15th.
So by May 15th, we should know what the percentage of the property value is being under protest.
That's your deadline to file for protests, but those go on through June and early July
Now,
sometimes.
I'm saying by then, we'll know how much.
How much is under protest? And that's what we, in my previous district, we would get, I'm sure it's similar here, we would get weekly to bi-weekly reports on how much is still under protest, how much has been decided, both for and against, and we get updated numbers. And so it's kind of like the numbers kind of converge over the life of this.
Obviously, we're not the only entity that's worried about this.
All taxing entities
Yeah,
are-
I was gonna say, all
Absolutely.
entities are gonna be worried about this.
So the number that you saw in there with a 0% property value growth is a conservative number. My hope is it will be slightly more than that. If you're sitting around the table hoping it's going to be a lot more than that, it will not. Okay. Any other questions on debt service? Okay, budget timeline. Let's talk about that. June 2nd is our next budget workshop that we have identified on the board planning calendar. It is the first Tuesday in June. We endeavor to have more information and perhaps a recommendation on compensation that's including subrates, that's including stipends. It's all things that go in towards compensation for you at that meeting. We do not have to adopt a compensation there or at the regular June meeting, but we will have better numbers for you. We'll have our first stab and hopefully some decent health insurance and benefit numbers for you at that time, as well as we continue to study over the next month. Right now, our plan is to do a budget workshop on July the 21st. That is held currently on the board planning calendar as a workshop date. I believe it was identified as superintendent form of assessment time, and we may do that at that time as well, but we have that time carved out. The regular meeting for July is the fourth Tuesday, the 28th. And then we should be able to talk about it perhaps at the July 28th meeting or August 16th meeting. Should have-
August 16th is 18th.
Is it 18th?
18th, yes. I just wanted to catch up. The first day is, write down the calendars, first day is school. I think
If that's the only number I got wrong on here, then I'll count that.
No, that's awesome,
So,
yes.
I'm not saying it is.
Well,
the
we
only
could
number.
come on a Sunday. I mean, if we need to come on a Sunday.
So that third Tuesday in August, whatever that date shall be, is a regular meeting. We should have updated property value projections then. And then we have a called meeting later in the month for the adoption of the budget and the tax rate to fund the budget.
What point we had to vote on the extra golden penny?
That's when we do, when we vote to adopt a tax rate.
Right.
Want to make sure.
And I know that we talked about
That's what I thought I'd be sure.
looking at that.
Yes. Okay, we are now to the question and discussion slide. I know we had lots of questions and a fair amount of discussion, but what else do we need to talk about?
So when do we have to make a plan on the INS budget
So we will adopt an INS tax rate at the same time we adopt an M&O tax rate at the end of August. We've got 3.5 months to see what our options are, both for addressing perhaps any type of debt service payment, also what resources we're going to have available through property tax revenue and those types of things. And maybe we'll have a better idea or guess at what a better collection rate number will be. We don't know.
There's been 3 budgets to approve and 2 tax rates to approve.
Yes, sir. M&O, child nutrition, and debt service.
You see, so fairly tight budget projections for us, but do you see area districts actually reducing the number of teachers or staff, or layoff's not the right word, but just having to lay off teachers and staff?
I don't know who's laying off or doing staffing reductions or furloughing or anything like that. And I think everybody is looking at attrition. I know one large area district that and this is a large district, that every resignation for it to be posted had to be approved by the superintendent himself. Wow. He looked at it with his own eyes. So I mean, that just tells you kind of, it's picture the frame a little bit about what local districts are doing with the uncertainty and making sure that, you know, we are not overstaffed going into next year. Which means, should we have better enrollment increases, should we actually increase, then we will need to add staff to address that enrollment. It just means we'll be adding them later. And surrounding districts will be adding them later. It's not a great time to be graduating with a degree in education because you might not be being hired anywhere in the state until very late or after school starts. It's just kind of where we are. We did see that going back to 2011. We saw that a lot with school districts trying to maintain that flexibility. So that's, and I would say area districts are very much in that wait and see mode because we're trying to figure out how many kids we're going to have. And to a certain extent, how we're going to educate them.
When you do finish, I guess when you address the whole instructional impact of COVID-19, are you going to actually have like an after-action review or something, a presentation to the board? From the standpoint of, when I say after-action report, is what went well, what didn't go so well, what can we improve on?
I would say this, that as an administrative team, we're in a constant state of evaluation and modification of what we're doing. The question you posed, Mr. Westbrook, is an interesting one because I don't know when COVID-19, the situation is going to end. I see us dealing with the cessation of face-to-face instruction for the last quarter of this school year. I see a ramping up of what normalization of the world and of education is going to look like over the summer, and then what school will look like if it looks different or more blended or slightly, if we have slightly fewer kids coming in because of social distancing or whatever is in place. And then we don't know if there's going to be a second round and further restrictions. So is there a possibility for us to go back and look at more formally with the trustees, what did we learn from cessation of face-to-face instruction for the last quarter of the year? Perhaps, but this is going to be really evolving and rolling over the next 3 to 6 months, maybe longer.
Yeah, maybe longer. I agree.
I think it's probably fair to say too, that because a lot of people are now discussing based off of what other superintendents may or may not have said out of Austin, NEISD, they're thinking, are we going to do what they're saying they might do? And I think in reality, all districts are probably waiting for the state to give some guidance before, and yes, you've looked at a lot of different things, but I think it's fair to say that really we need to know what TEA is going to ask us to do. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. I would say one of the things I think we did well as a school district in preparing for what might have happened is we got a group of district leaders, Mr. Prusky, Dr. Edwards, Ms. Cannon, some other district leaders in the room in the last week of February and looked each other in the eyes and said, hey, coronavirus is out there. It's starting to spread in the United States. We don't really think it's a big deal. We might be out of school. We might be out of school a couple of weeks. But in case we're not, why don't we start getting together and formulating the broad strokes of what a plan for remote instruction, or we called it online learning or e-learning. We don't even know what we called it then. It turned out to be our remote learning plan. Why don't we just put the broad strokes together and start pre-thinking that? And Dr. Edwards and his group in student administrative, student academic service, Kelly Kovacs, and the coordinators over there and the other directors, an excellent job of starting to put that together so that when we came back on March the 16th, that first day of closure, we ramped up very quickly so that we could start a pretty detailed and robust remote learning plan and stand that up next week. I use that as a metaphor or an example of what I think SCUC and other districts are doing now. We're pre-thinking what it could look like if we have to have some type of modified ability to gather in the fall, not thinking that's what's going to happen. That's not the first rail of planning for us. But we have groups that are working on what that could look like. And so I don't really want to say, yeah, we're going to do this or that, or even have any type of conjecture. But what I want the trustees to know and the public is, it is incumbent upon us to battle plan for a number of different scenarios, even if we at this point think they are unlikely. And that's what we're doing in the background.
I just want to say that thank your presentation. Thank you so much. I mean, it was big rocks, like you said, and hopefully all of us have a great understanding as we go into these next budget workshop meetings. We know those big rocks, if we have to go down and look in some other levels, that we have the big picture right now, as well as the public, if they'll go back and listen to this budget workshop just to kind of see the planning that's being done and has been done for us to adopt a budget in August. So I appreciate all y'all's work already that you've already done on this. So.
I appreciate that, President Drysdale. And for those of you who like spreadsheets and tables and small numbers, you'll love June. There'll be a lot more of that in June and July and August as we move through. So
there's a few budget people in here.
I'd just like to say up front that I think the district has done an exemplary job in unprecedented times to get us where we're at. We know we have a lot of questions that do not have answers at this point in time, but based on the work that's been done today, I know we'll get those questions answered and we'll make the best decisions we can in a very uncertain future. So I congratulate your staff and also the teachers and the administrators of the campuses for what they've done. They've really stepped up and have really done an exemplary job. I've had parents tell me that they were amazed how quickly we were ramped up on the online learning and how well they're doing. So I think as a district, we've done an excellent job in, like I said, very uncertain times. So I would definitely like to congratulate staff and central office staff for the work they're doing, because I know that y'all done exemplary work and will continue to do so.
Mr. Finley, I appreciate that, and you're right. Our staff has done a tremendous job. We wouldn't be able to do that if we didn't have teacher leaders and campus administrators and district administrators who are really thoughtful about how they approach a number of difficult situations. So we are blessed to have those leaders here in this district. And we haven't hit the mark all, 100% of the time. And one of the things that we asked, I think my first letter to the parents and the staff was, it's grace. No, we're going to make some mistakes. We're going to try a bunch of stuff, and we're going to miss the mark some. And that's one of the things I just appreciate about this community, our parents, our staff members, and we've extended grace to each other, and you as a board of trustees have to us as a leadership team and to our teachers as well. We're trying some things. A lot of them are working out, some are not. And we look forward to trying some more things to really put the best product we can out there for our kids to maximize the learning we have in this environment.
One last thing I wanted to say, it's Teacher Appreciation Week, and I sure didn't get to appreciate them in person, but I encourage if anyone's listening and just how much we appreciate our teachers. I mean, on a dime, they changed everything about education with no guidance and with guidance from us, but with no, months of planning or anything like that. And we've got, like you said, 99% that we can say roughly, maybe 98 that are roughly engaged, and it's due to those staff members for them reaching out to our students. I've heard of ones going by to make sure, waving from the street to some of them to make sure and checking on them. And so we just appreciate all of you teachers. I hope that they'll get this message some way, and just thank you for caring about our kids so much.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anything? All right, it is 8:11. We are adjourned.